All right, well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about X-Men Apocalypse? Stick around and find out. Here we are, born to be kings. We're the princes of the universe. Ha! That reference is going to make a lot more sense in about 2 minutes. Maybe a little longer. Stick in there for it. Man, I got a little thing in my throat when I was doing that. I didn't see that coming. All right, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions with an uncut review of X-Men Apocalypse. I'm a big fan of the X-Men movies. I've really enjoyed them a lot. I would describe them as being solid movies to me, not like these really awesome movies, but really solid, really enjoyable. I own them all. The synopsis for this one, which the way I would describe it anyway, is that an ancient, powerful mutant once worshipped as a god awakens to destroy humanity after being asleep for thousands of years, and the mutants of the world must either join him or band together in hopes of saving the world. Man, you see my eye tearing up? I really, like, my throat really kind of got hurt a little bit there. All right, well, the tone. Let's talk about the story, the script, and pacing. The tone is, I feel like it's serious. It's consistent with the past X-Men movies, which I differentiate. I'll refer to those as like the X movies, and then the other Marvel movies as the Marvel movies, just so there's no confusion, because I am going to reference both. The tone is serious, but with infrequent yet effective humor, compared to like the Marvel movies, where there's like jokes peppered all the way through that, for me, are almost never funny. They did great in the Iron Man movies, but they've really just kind of fallen flat, and I feel like they just kind of clutter up the scripts of the Marvel movies these days. But for me, in these movies, they do a good job of like using their jokes economically, and the same was true in this movie. Like, there's not a ton of jokes. It's not peppered all over the place, but when they're there, they are either funny or they just relieve tension. They serve a dramatic purpose. They're not just there to keep things light for the kiddies and the families and, whatever the crap. I didn't feel moved as strongly in this movie, or as regularly in this movie as I did in Man of Steel or Batman vs. Superman, which I know a lot of people weren't moved at all and they didn't like those, but for me those were very dramatically moving movies. But I was still moved once or twice, and so I'm wondering if these X-Men movies represent kind of the happy medium between Marvel and DC movies. If that's the case, if they had to make a course correction for financial purposes in the DC movies, I would miss the tone that we've had so far, but I wouldn't mind if they settled on this kind of, midway, where it's not as dark and heavy, which I would miss, but it's still taken very seriously, and there are moments that are generally moving that do cause tears to just briefly almost well up in my eyes. So I really appreciate the X-Men movies for that. I do find them, like I said, to be kind of maybe a happy medium between the tone of the Marvel movies and the tone of so far the DC movies. The stories and characters, I felt like, require knowledge of the X-Men movies to fully invest in this movie. But the payoff is nice. I wish that Marvel would, and I hope that DC will, respect and use continuity building like these X-Men movies did. I mean, we kind of make a big deal out of the fact that like the Marvel Cinematic Universe is, oh my gosh, for the first time it's sharing continuity between movies and stuff like that. But at this point, I look back and I would argue that even though there are more mainstream Marvel movies than the X-Men movies, that the X-Men movies leverage that shared continuity more effectively, for me, I think, than the Marvel movies do. Sometimes the Marvel movies will even ignore like major things seemingly that are going on in the lives of characters, and they just don't represent them as much. And anyway, I just feel like they leverage. I can't put my finger on how, but for me, they leverage the continuity more effectively than Marvel has, or than DC has so far with the two movies they've put out. I just sense more of a richness in the history of this world. Even though there was a timeline change after the events of Days of Future Past, we still have like Jean Grey and Nightcrawler and Cyclops, and knowing what we know of the older cast and their representations of those characters, it adds richness to the representation of those characters here. And in some ways, I almost think that the writing in this movie counts on your knowledge of those characters from the other movies with the older cast, and kind of like builds on that, or just plays off of it in a little way. So I really like the way, again, as I said, that they leverage continuity in these X-Men movies. The action beats and the creative power use in this movie is some of the best in superhero movies. I mean, we've seen Nightcrawler do some awesome things in X2, but he was freaking amazing in this. I loved watching. They just took it a step further. It was just neat to see all the way that powers were used and unleashed in new ways, in more epic, large-scale ways. It was really cool. The level of power on display in this flick, mixed with character motivations behind them, and that's really key for me, gave all that spectacle weight, and it gave it dramatic scale that's I think much needed for my enjoyment in these kinds of stories. There's plenty of action, but there's also consistent inclusion of character motivation that for me makes the action worth watching, and more than just kind of heartless eye candy that is like, looks cool, but I'm not invested in, I'm not concerned for anybody, in lots of the mainstream Marvel movies. And I was definitely not invested in the way that I was for Batman vs. Superman or Man of Steel, but there was still, like, motivations were clearly presented in many of the characters to the point where I was like, I cared, and so when Magneto, as he does in all these movies at some point, in them very emotionally, at least with the new cast, the younger cast, his power use is often very much tied to his emotions and the scars of his past. And so there's like, when the metal starts rattling, it's more than just cool looking. It's like you get that feeling of, oh dang, it is hitting the fan now. He is going to just wreck everything, because of who his character is. You're feeling his power more than you would if they just kind of throw around CG, which I think we see all too often in superhero movies. So the subplot, speaking of Magneto, he starts with this subplot of having started a family over the course of the 10 years between the events of Days of Future Past and this movie. 10 years has passed, and he started this new family, which felt weird. I was just like, I'll have to go back and see if I can connect the dots of how Magneto from the end of Days of Future Past could logically arrive at this one. I guess he kind of disarm and go home at the end of that movie or something, but it was still just isn't that what happened, or did he get beaten? I can't remember now. Anyway, it was just weird to see him as this kind of family man at the beginning of this movie, and I was like, why are they doing this? And then later on in the movie, I thought, oh, this is why they did it, to pay off this moment with another character. I won't spoil it, but then that moment never came. It was delayed, and it's like, no, we're gonna save that for a future story. And I'm like, why did you do that? Why all this setup and then not use the payoff? I think it would have made much more sense of Magneto's motivations at the end of the movie. So I feel like there was a big missed opportunity there that I'm just kind of like baffled by. So in summary, as far as like the story and stuff, this is not a powerful bar-raising superhero movie for me, but it's a solid movie, and I would call it a step or two above the status quo that I've come to expect from the mainstream Marvel movies. Regarding the cast, now all returning cast members are solid, so I don't really have anything to say about them. Oscar Isaac is getting lots of buzz right now as kind of an up-and-coming big name, and he's very solid as Apocalypse, but I think probably underused. The new young cast that are playing characters like Jean Grey, Cyclops, Storm, and Nightcrawler, they're all different in their portrayals compared to the original cast, not radically so you can like see them being the same characters, but I'm interested in where they will take them in the future. I would have liked more personality from Jean and Cyclops, but the script gave them, I think, little to work with, so I'm hopeful that they can be improved on in the future. I would like to see more of what the actress playing Jean is capable of. I just felt like she wasn't maybe going far enough with the character, but again, like I said, the script wasn't giving her a lot to work with. I just want to see that character really work well. So hopefully we'll see that in the future, assuming that a reboot is not what's coming next after the final Hugh Jackman Wolverine movie coming up. Regarding the stunts and the visuals, the CGI, it's a bit weak when showing us digital landscapes. I would say in particular, when the camera is like whooshing up and away from some building and going up into the air to show us an overview of the city or something like that. And they use like basically a digital city and digital buildings to do those kinds of things. To me, those shots in lots of these movies is just like, yeah, that's a CG, helicopter camera. It's all CG. And so that's continues to be a little bit like, meh, okay. It doesn't feel big in scope. It doesn't feel epic because it doesn't look real to me. But in the action scenes, I felt like all the CG and special effects, they do what they should do, without raising the bar for visual realism in these kinds of movies. I did not like the costume for Psylocke. It's very 80s inspired, and I know you're going to say, hey, it takes place in the 80s. Of course it's going to be 80s inspired, but, they update so much of the wardrobe of so many characters, and they don't keep them in the 80s. I mean, they're not all wearing yellow spandex or whatever the crap they were wearing in the 80s, I just wish that the civilian wardrobe had been 80s style, and all the costumes and stuff for when they're in action mode would be just kind of modern and cool or whatever. I felt like Psylocke was wearing like an 80s kind of swimsuit cut and had like these straps on her. It was just a weird costume, and it also helps that I didn't feel like Olivia Munn, I guess this is getting back into casting a little bit, I didn't feel like she had the physicality to do such a physical role. It's kind of the same complaint that I would have for Gal Gadot, or however you say her name, playing Wonder Woman. It's like, these are really physically imposing and action-based female characters. I would like to see an actor that just like has more muscle tone and that moves faster and that you believe has a history in stunt work and you just kind of believe them a little bit more. Speaking again of CG, in all of Psylocke's kind of like most action-heavy moments, it was clearly, to my eye, a CG Psylocke. I'm like, well, Olivia Munn, clearly was not the choice for that kind of moment, in the movie. So, and also I felt like her power set just wasn't comparable to the other three characters that were kind of aiding Apocalypse in this movie. And I was just like, the other characters are on such a big scale of power, and I was like, she's, I don't know. I would have preferred somebody else in that role. I'm sure there's a comic book history reason for her being in that role and doing that, but I didn't find that character really interesting in terms of who she was or what she did at all. So the age makeup was also another complaint of mine, or lack thereof, I should say. That was a letdown. The First Class, X-Men First Class, released 5 years ago. But the characters are now 20 years older in the timeline. Okay, now I will give you Mystique because she can shift her appearance, make herself look any age that she wants. But we've got Hank McCoy and Professor X and Magneto, who should all look 20 years older than they did in First Class. And they maybe look 10 years older, but certainly not 20. And there's no way that Magneto looks like in 10 more years he's going to look like Ian McKellen did in the first X-Men movie. So I wish that they, I know it's a movie and blah, 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 blah. I wish they could have just met me halfway a little bit more and added more gray, significantly more gray to Magneto's hair, and just gone a little further with the age makeup. That would have been nice. But also, Quicksilver should be 10 years older in this movie than he was in Days of Future Past. He has not changed at all. His life situation hasn't changed at all, but even more striking, his appearance has not changed at all. Like, I don't think even his haircut is different. So it was very, very weird. Anyway, ultimately those things are like minor gripes. It's not a big deal to me, and I can just kind of shrug at them. All right, so is there anything of moral or philosophical or spiritual relevance that might trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation during or after watching this movie? Well, maybe. Apocalypse, the character, is a noteworthy yet I think shallow exploration of the whole Chariots of the Gods concept that's appealed to by conspiracy theorists, and that idea being that gods and angels of ancient religions or whatever, they're actually just aliens, or there's some other explanation for them. One character suggests in this movie that Apocalypse was the inspiration for elements in the book of Revelation, as if like the Apostle John got his ideas from these ancient stories of some some other god or whatever. There is a tendency, even in some circles of Christianity, to call the Bible into question when we don't like something about it. Not because reasons to doubt are most likely to be true, but because they are remotely possible, we might say. There's a whole lot of power given to that word possible. Well, it's possible that blah 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 blah, and therefore because it's possible and because I like that idea more than this one, we don't say that, and I don't think we admit to that, but because I like this idea more, and because it is possible, like in the same way that I could be plugged into the Matrix, but I have no reason to really believe that I am, but yet it is possible, and I like this idea, I'm going to believe that. I think that's where a lot of these ideas generate from. The ideas that are really too generously called theories. So I think that all comes from a desire to not submit to anyone other than ourselves. I think that's the origin of all those kinds of ideas that are generated. We love the idea of a forgiving God, or a God who rescues us from our troubles in life, and that kind of belief in God is even affirmed in this movie. There's a point where like people are saying, only by God's grace did we survive this, and then like 10 seconds later someone says, I think our prayers have been answered. So we like that kind of God, but we don't like the idea of a God who is all-knowing and perfectly just, who also holds us accountable. We do not like that God. We do not like that concept. So we hang on to the ideas in the Bible that we like, with really no solid reasons for doing so, because then in the next breath we deny the ideas in the Bible that we don't like and concoct reasons to doubt the reliability of the biblical account in those cases. The director, Bryan Singer, has openly compared Apocalypse to, I guess I would say the idea he has anyway, of the Old Testament God, as he puts it, as though it's a different God in the New Testament, which I would certainly beg to differ. Apocalypse even says in this movie that he has been known as Elohim, which is among several other names of gods, which Elohim is a plural word for deity. It's a very general kind of term that's used sometimes to refer to God in the Tanakh or the Old Testament. Although it is worth noting that his Apocalypse's self-comparison to Yahweh, which is God's personal name in the Bible, which is highly revered, is only present in the trailers, and it was omitted from the movie, and they use Elohim instead, which is a much more general word used for deity in the Bible. So I'm wondering if maybe there was some pushback from the Jewish community. I don't know, I could be wrong. I just kind of assumed that pushback from the Christian community is largely ignored by Hollywood, but maybe the Jewish community would have more of a voice there. I don't know, that's wild speculation on my part. In any case, Apocalypse says early on in the movie that this world needs cleansing and this world needs saving, he says. Ideas that are very consistent with the Bible. Although Apocalypse, I would say, also does many things that are inconsistent with God in the Bible. And the movie also repeatedly affirms Apocalypse as being a false god, So the theme isn't as present or heavy-handed as I thought it might be based on the trailers. With a strong Darwinian worldview as the foundation for these flicks, I'm glad they didn't go overboard and claim that Yahweh was actually just a mutant. That would have been annoying to me and lessened the experience for me. Still, it's no surprise that a powerful force insisting the world is worthy of judgment is placed in the role of the bad guy that the heroes have to somehow find a way to defeat. That's not a surprise to me. Japanese RPGs have been killing God in final boss fights for years. It's just in our nature to rebel against anyone judging our character and our morals, even if they have every right and responsibility to do so. Just as God does, just as the court system, and police, they have the right and the responsibility to evaluate our actions and the to a degree the morality, as much as morality is legislated in our country. It's their responsibility in order to maintain a just, peaceful society to do that. But I mean, we're quick to kind of see them as the enemy and the man, and that's bringing us down and stuff like that. All that said, the movie never felt liberally or atheistically preachy. It was a cool superhero flick that left a little room for thinking about some relevant human issues. So at the end of the day, good stuff. Definitely something that I'm going to be buying. If I were a time traveler, I would go back in time to myself and say, Spader. You don't need to see this in theaters because it's just a buy when it comes out on Blu-ray. So just wait, and don't brave theaters with people that are talking and being loud and doing things that are annoying during the movie. Just wait and enjoy it at your home when it comes out on Blu-ray. You're definitely going to want to buy this one. It's just as good as the last two and has some fun surprises along the way. It's rated PG-13 for sequences of violence, action, and destruction, brief, strong language, and some suggestive themes. All right, those are my thoughts. I'd love to get yours in the comments below. Did this live up to your expectations? Do you feel like this series is kind of losing steam and it's high time for a reboot? I'm just interested what your thoughts are. You can also support this channel by visiting spiritblade.com and seeing what we have for you there. And after that, boom! I hope you'll join us at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.